The crystal walls of the Zaphirian command ship gleamed under the light of a dying star. High Commander Veltar stood before the massive viewing screen. His forearms crossed behind his back as he watched the small blue planet rotating slowly in the distance. Earth looked peaceful from this far away, almost harmless with its white clouds and green continents. But Veltar knew better than to judge by appearances. This tiny world had become a thorn in the side of the great Zaphirian Empire. For 3,000 years, the Zaphirians had ruled this sector of the galaxy. Their ships were the fastest, their weapons the most powerful, and their warriors the most feared. Whenever they found a new species, the pattern was always the same. First came the ultimatum, then the demonstration of power, and finally the complete surrender. It had worked on 47 different worlds. It should have worked on Earth too. Veltar turned away from the screen and walked to the center of the war room. 12 other species were represented here. All of them conquered peoples who now served the Empire. The Koreth with their scaled skin and yellow eyes. The Altarians with their long necks and silver hair. The Benth with their multiple arms and chittering voices. All of them had learned to bow their heads when Zaphirian commanders spoke. "The humans have rejected our third ultimatum," Veltar announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. The sound made several of the alien representatives flinch. "They continue to mine the Kepler system without our permission. They expand their territory into space that belongs to the Empire. They show no respect for our authority." One of the Altarian delegates raised a trembling hand. "Commander, perhaps we could offer them more time to consider. Some species need longer to understand the wisdom of joining the Empire." Veltar's 4 eyes focused on the delegate with cold fury. "Time? We have given them 5 years to submit. They build more ships instead of surrendering. They train more soldiers instead of laying down their weapons. They prepare for war instead of accepting peace." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what came next when a species refused to join the Empire peacefully. The First Legion would be deployed. Elite warriors who had never lost a single campaign would be sent to crush all resistance. After that, there would be no more negotiations, no more chances, no more mercy. Meanwhile, millions of miles away, Captain Jake Murphy sat in the command chair of the UES Defiance. His ship was small compared to the alien vessels, but it was fast and well armed by human standards. Jake had been patrolling the outer solar system for 3 months, watching for any sign of alien activity. Today, that waiting had finally paid off. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Amy Foster. "It's from the alien fleet. They want to speak with our government." Jake nodded grimly. "Put it through, Amy. Let's hear what they have to say this time." The alien voice that filled the bridge was cold and mechanical, translated by the ship's computer systems. "This is High Commander Veltar of the Zaphirian Empire. We give humanity one final chance to surrender. Submit to our authority, and your species will be allowed to live as servants of the Empire. Refuse and you will be destroyed completely. You have 24 hours to respond." Jake looked around at his crew. They were all young, most of them in their 20s or early 30s. They had joined the space fleet to explore the stars and protect Earth from unknown dangers. None of them had expected to face an alien invasion, but here they were. Every face he saw showed the same mixture of fear and determination that he felt in his own heart. "Amy, open a channel back to them," Jake said quietly. "Channel open, sir." Jake stood up from his chair and faced the main screen, even though he knew the aliens couldn't see him. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady. "This is Captain Jake Murphy of the United Earth Space Fleet. You can tell your commander that humanity doesn't kneel to anyone. We've never bowed to tyrants from our own world, and we won't bow to tyrants from the stars. If you want our surrender, you'll have to come and take it." He nodded to Amy, who cut the transmission immediately. The bridge was quiet for a long moment before Jake sat back down in his chair. "Set course for Earth, best possible speed. Command needs to know what's coming." On Earth, President Lisa Carter received the news in her office deep beneath the White House. The bunker had been built during the old Cold War, but now it served as humanity's command center for an entirely different kind of conflict. Admiral John Hayes and General Kate Sullivan sat across from her, their faces grim as they reviewed the latest intelligence reports. "How long do we have?" Carter asked. She had been president for only 2 years, elected on a platform of space exploration and peaceful contact with alien civilizations. Now she faced the possibility of humanity's extinction. Our best estimate is 2 weeks before they reach our outer colonies, Admiral Hayes replied. They'll probably hit Titan first. We have about 200 Marines stationed there, plus some mining equipment and basic defenses. It won't be enough to stop them, but it might slow them down. General Sullivan leaned forward in her chair. We've been running war games for months trying to figure out how to fight an enemy with superior technology. The answer isn't pretty, Madam President. We can't match their ships or their weapons, but we might be able to make them pay a heavy price for every victory. President Carter turned to the third person in the room, a thin man with graying hair and tired eyes. Dr. Alex Chen had been working on humanity's secret weapons program for the past 3 years. Ever since first contact with the Zaphirians had made it clear that not all aliens came in peace. What about Project Prometheus? Carter asked. Are we ready? Dr. Chen shook his head slowly. The weapons are untested, Madam President. We've only had computer simulations and small-scale experiments. We don't know how effective they'll be against real alien technology, and some of the weapons are almost as dangerous to us as they are to the enemy. But they're all we have, Admiral Hayes said grimly. Carter stood up and walked to the wall screen that showed Earth from space. Her homeworld looked so beautiful and peaceful. Soon it might be nothing but a burned rock floating in the void. Then we use them. Send orders to all commands. Begin implementing the Prometheus protocols immediately. And get me a direct line to every colony in the system. If we're going to fight these aliens, we need every human ready to do their part. The meeting continued for another hour, planning for a war that no human had ever imagined fighting. They talked about supply lines and troop movements, about evacuation plans and last-ditch defenses. They made decisions that would affect millions of lives and possibly determine the future of humanity itself. But through it all, one thing remained constant. None of them talked about surrender. Despite facing an enemy with superior technology and vastly superior numbers, the idea of giving up never entered the discussion. That was something the Zaphirians would never understand about humans. Something that would ultimately cost them everything they held dear. The Zaphirian First Legion emerged from hyperspace like a storm made of metal and fire. 100 ships appeared in the outer solar system, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their hulls gleamed with a dark crystal that seemed to absorb light, making them look like pieces of living shadow against the stars. These were not exploration vessels or cargo haulers. These were ships built for war and conquest. Legion Commander Thexval stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He was tall even by Zaphirian standards, nearly 8 feet of muscle and bone covered in the natural armor plating that made his species so difficult to kill. Surgical scars crossed his carapace where enemy weapons had failed to penetrate deeply enough to cause lasting damage. His 4 arms moved constantly as he reviewed tactical displays and coordinated with his officers. Thexval had personally led the conquest of 47 worlds. He had seen species try to fight with primitive weapons, others attempt to hide in deep bunkers, and still others who simply gave up without resistance. All of them had eventually fallen to his warriors. The pattern was always the same, and he expected nothing different from the humans. Commander, we have reached the human mining colony on Titan, reported his tactical officer. Sensor scans show approximately 200 defenders and basic fortifications. No heavy weapons detected. Thexval's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a smile among his people. 200 humans against 20,000 Zaphirian warriors. The battle would be over in minutes. Begin the assault. I want this colony secured within 1 hour. Make an example of them for the rest of their species to see. On Titan, Colonel Ryan Blake watched the alien fleet approach through the reinforced windows of the command bunker. The Zaphirian ships moved with an elegant grace that made them beautiful to watch. But Blake knew that beauty carried death for him and all his soldiers. He had served in 3 different wars on Earth, fighting against human enemies who at least shared the same basic biology and motivations. This was different. This was humanity's first real test against aliens who saw them as nothing more than animals to be tamed or destroyed. Sir, we're receiving evacuation orders from Earth Command. Lieutenant Amy Foster reported from her communication station. They want us to fall back to the inner system. Blake looked around at his soldiers. They were Marines, volunteers who had signed up for the most dangerous assignments the human military could offer. Some of them were veterans of Earth's various conflicts. Others were young recruits who had never seen real combat, but all of them had chosen to be here, standing between Earth and its enemies. Negative on that evacuation order, Lieutenant. Blake said calmly. "Send a message back to Earth Command. Tell them we're going to show these aliens what humans do when someone threatens our home." The first Zaphirian landing ships touched down on Titan's surface an hour later. They were massive, each one carrying 500 elite warriors in full combat armor. The aliens moved with mechanical precision, spreading out in perfect formations as they advanced toward the human colony. Their weapons hummed with energy, capable of cutting through steel and stone with equal ease. The battle began when Sergeant Maria Lopez opened fire from the eastern perimeter. Her squad of 12 Marines had dug themselves into positions behind mining equipment and prefabricated barriers. Their weapons were simple by galactic standards, chemical propellant rifles that fired metal projectiles. But they had been designed specifically for fighting in Titan's low gravity and thin atmosphere. The first wave of Zaphirian assault troops expected to encounter the usual pattern of resistance. A few shots fired from defensive positions, followed by rapid retreat when the aliens demonstrated their superior firepower. Instead, they ran into sustained, accurate fire from positions that had been carefully prepared and expertly camouflaged. Lopez had been a sniper before joining the Space Marines, and she put those skills to good use. Her rifle cracked again and again, each shot aimed at the joints and weak points in Zaphirian armor. The aliens' natural carapace could stop most energy weapons, but it had not evolved to deal with high-velocity metal projectiles designed to penetrate and fragment inside the target. The alien warriors began to fall. Not all of Lopez's shots were fatal, but each wounded Zaphirian required 2 or 3 others to carry him to safety. The perfect formations began to break down as the aliens sought cover behind rocks and equipment. "They're not running," one of the Zaphirian squad leaders reported to his commander. "The humans are maintaining their positions and continuing to fire despite being outnumbered." Thexval frowned as he listened to the reports. This was not how conquests were supposed to go. The humans should have retreated by now, falling back to secondary positions where they could be surrounded and eliminated. Instead, they seemed to be fighting harder as the battle continued. The eastern perimeter held for 3 hours against continuous assault. Lopez and her Marines used every trick they had learned in training and combat. When their primary weapons ran low on ammunition, they switched to grenades and improvised explosives. When the aliens brought up heavy weapons, the humans used the mining tunnels to move between positions. Finally, the Zaphirian numbers began to tell. Lopez found herself down to just 4 Marines, surrounded by alien warriors who had managed to flank their position. Her rifle was empty, her sidearm had only 3 rounds left, and there was no way to reach the ammunition depot. "Sergeant, what are your orders?" asked Private Danny Morrison, the youngest member of her squad. He was barely 19 years old, fresh out of basic training and serving his first tour of duty. Lopez looked at the approaching aliens, then at the demolition charges they had planted throughout the eastern section of the colony as a last resort. The charges were connected to a manual detonator in the command bunker, but there was also an emergency trigger in each defensive position. "Orders are simple, Private," Lopez said quietly. "We make sure they remember this day." She reached for the emergency detonator, a small red button that would set off every explosive charge in the eastern section. The blast would take out not only the Zaphirian assault force but also Lopez and her remaining Marines. It was not the kind of decision that appeared in military training manuals, but it was exactly the kind of decision that defined what it meant to be human. The explosion that followed lit up Titan's sky like a second sun. The entire eastern section of the colony disappeared in a ball of fire and debris that could be seen from orbit. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but a crater where the mining facilities had been. Nearly 3,000 Zaphirian warriors had been eliminated in an instant, along with 2 of their command vehicles and a mobile artillery platform. Commander Thexval stared at the tactical display in shock. In a single moment, the humans had inflicted more casualties on the First Legion than any enemy had managed in the past century. Worse, they had done it by sacrificing themselves, something that violated every principle of rational military doctrine. "Sir, the remaining human positions are still active," his tactical officer reported. "They're continuing to resist." The battle for Titan lasted 18 more hours. Colonel Blake and his remaining Marines fought from every building, every tunnel, every pile of debris they could find. When their ammunition ran out, they used improvised weapons made from mining equipment. When their improvised weapons broke, they fought with their hands. The humans seemed to grow more dangerous as the battle continued, not less. They used tactics that the Zaphirians had never encountered, turning every retreat into an ambush and every defensive position into a trap. They fought with a ferocity that seemed to increase when they were wounded rather than decrease. By the time the last human position fell, the First Legion had lost over 8,000 warriors. The colony was in ruins, its facilities destroyed and its population eliminated. By any reasonable military standard, the Zaphirians had achieved a complete victory. But Commander Thexval did not feel victorious as he stood in the wreckage of the human command bunker. His warriors moved through the rubble like ghosts, treating their wounded and counting their dead. Many of them bore injuries that would take weeks to heal, wounds inflicted by primitive weapons wielded by desperate enemies. For the first time in his long military career, Thexval found himself wondering if this conquest might be different from all the others. The news of Titan's fall spread through human space like wildfire, but the reports carried an unexpected message alongside the grief. The Zaphirian First Legion, supposedly invincible warriors who had conquered 47 worlds without significant losses, had paid a terrible price for their victory. 8,000 dead aliens for 200 human marines. The math was brutal but clear. Humanity had found a way to hurt their enemies. Commander Thexval stood in the medical bay of his flagship, watching his wounded warriors receive treatment. Regeneration fluid dripped from dozens of injuries as alien doctors worked to repair damage that should have been impossible. The human weapons were primitive by galactic standards, but they seemed designed to cause maximum pain and lasting injury to Zaphirian physiology. How is this possible? Thexval demanded of his chief medical officer. These humans have barely achieved spaceflight. Their technology is centuries behind our own, yet they fight as if they have studied our weaknesses for generations. The medical officer, an elderly Zaphirian with scarred carapace from previous campaigns, looked up from his patient with troubled eyes. Commander, I have examined the weapons used by the humans. They are indeed primitive, but they are also specifically designed to penetrate our natural armor at close range. The projectiles fragment inside the body cavity, causing internal damage that our regeneration systems struggle to repair. Thexval's mandibles clicked in frustration. Are you saying they knew about our biology before we even met them? I am saying they learned quickly, Commander. Very quickly. The second major engagement occurred 3 days later at the Europa mining station. Captain Ben Rodriguez commanded a small flotilla of 3 frigates and 12 fighters, all that remained of the Outer System patrol fleet. His ships were fast but lightly armed, designed for patrol duty rather than fleet combat. Against the remaining 80 Zaphirian vessels, they should have lasted minutes at most, but Rodriguez had studied every second of combat footage from Titan. He had analyzed Zaphirian ship movements, weapon patterns, and tactical doctrine. Most importantly, he had noticed something that the aliens apparently hadn't realized about themselves. Their ships were built for fighting other energy weapon-equipped vessels, not kinetic projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. All ships. This is actual, Rodriguez broadcast on the fleet frequency. We're not going to try to outfight them ship to ship. We're going to make them remember that humans don't go quietly into the dark. The UES Valkyrie, commanded by Helen Grant, led the attack. Her frigate accelerated directly toward the Zaphirian formation. Engines overloaded and reactor containment systems deliberately compromised. The alien ships opened fire with their energy weapons, beams of coherent light that should have vaporized the human vessel instantly. Instead, the Valkyrie's experimental armor held just long enough. The ship's hull was designed with overlapping layers of reflective materials and ablative compounds, all of it based on analysis of captured Zaphirian weapons. It wouldn't stop their fire indefinitely, but it would last long enough for what Grant had planned. The frigate crashed into the Zaphirian flagship at nearly 30% of light speed. The kinetic impact released more energy than a nuclear weapon, vaporizing both ships instantly and sending a shockwave through the alien formation that disabled 6 more vessels. But Grant's sacrifice was only the beginning. As the Zaphirians tried to reform their battle line, the remaining human ships launched their fighters in a coordinated assault that defied every principle of space combat doctrine. Instead of trying to engage the enemy ships with their light weapons, the pilots aimed their craft directly at alien hulls and activated their self-destruct systems at the moment of impact. pilot after pilot followed the same pattern. Lieutenant Danny Morrison flew his fighter straight into a Zaphirian cruiser's bridge. His final transmission a simple message. For Titan, for humanity, for everyone you'll never get the chance to kill. The explosion gutted the alien ship from bow to stern. Commander Thexaval watched in horror as his fleet was systematically destroyed by tactics that made no sense, according to any military doctrine he had ever studied. The humans were not trying to win the battle in any conventional sense. They were trying to inflict maximum casualties regardless of the cost to themselves. Sir, we need to retreat, his tactical officer urged. We've lost over half our remaining ships. The humans are using suicide tactics that we cannot counter. Retreat? Thexval's voice carried disbelief. The First Legion does not retreat from primitive aliens. Commander, these are not primitive aliens, the officer replied quietly. These are something we have never encountered before. The space battle around Europa lasted 6 hours and ended with the complete destruction of both fleets. Not a single human ship survived the engagement, but only 3 damaged Zaphirian vessels limped away toward their home territory. The mighty First Legion, pride of the Zaphirian Empire, had been reduced from 100 ships to 3 barely functional hulks. The news reached the Galactic Council chambers like a physical blow. For 3,000 years, the Zaphirian First Legion had been the ultimate expression of military power in their sector. They had conquered worlds, destroyed fleets, and brought entire civilizations to their knees without suffering significant casualties. High Commander Veltar stood before the assembled representatives of 12 conquered species, his 4 hands trembling as he read the battle reports. The numbers seemed impossible, but they came from multiple sources and had been verified by survivors. The humans destroyed our fleet, he announced, his voice barely above a whisper. The First Legion is gone. The council chamber erupted in shocked voices speaking a dozen different languages. The Korath delegates chittered among themselves in their native tongue. The Altarians stared with their large eyes wide with disbelief. The Benth representatives made clicking sounds that indicated extreme agitation. One of the braver delegates, a Korath female with golden scales, dared to speak. Commander, how is such a thing possible? The humans have been spacefaring for less than a century. Their weapons are chemical-based projectiles and primitive nuclear devices. Veltar turned to face her, and she flinched at the fury in his alien eyes. Their weapons may be primitive, but their will to fight is something we have never encountered. They do not retreat when faced with superior forces. They do not surrender when defeat becomes inevitable. They fight until every last one of them is dead, and they take as many of us with them as possible. Across the galaxy, word of humanity's victories began to spread through the networks of conquered peoples. In the slave pits of the Korath homeworld, miners whispered about the small blue planet whose inhabitants had done the impossible. In the forced labor camps of Altair Prime, workers spoke in hushed tones about human soldiers who chose death before dishonor. The stories grew in the telling, as stories always do. Humans became 10 feet tall and bulletproof. Human ships became unstoppable weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Human soldiers became legendary figures who could kill a dozen aliens with their bare hands, but beneath the exaggerations lay a core of truth that resonated with every species that had ever been. Conquered by the Zaphirian Empire, for the first time in galactic history, someone had stood up to the overlords and made them bleed. Someone had proven that the mighty Zaphirians were not invincible after all. On Earth, the survivors prepared for what everyone knew was coming next. The Zaphirians would not accept the destruction of their First Legion without response. They would return with everything they had, determined to crush humanity completely and restore their reputation for invincibility. In the deep bunkers beneath Colorado, Admiral Hayes met with what remained of humanity's military leadership. Their victories had come at a terrible cost. Entire colonies had been evacuated or destroyed. Hundreds of ships had been lost. Thousands of their best soldiers and pilots were dead. Intelligence reports suggest they're mobilizing their entire fleet, Hayes announced grimly. Every ship in Zaphirian space is being recalled to their home systems. They're going to hit us with everything they have. General Sullivan studied the defensive plans they had been developing since the war began. We can't win a conventional battle against their entire fleet. But we've proven that conventional battles aren't the only way to fight. Dr. Chen entered the briefing room carrying a sealed case that contained the results of humanity's most desperate research project. Project Prometheus Phase 2 is ready for deployment. The new weapons are based on everything we've learned about Zaphirian technology and biology. They're untested in combat conditions, but our simulations suggest they will be even more effective than our previous efforts. The meeting continued through the night as they planned for what might be humanity's final battle. They talked about sacrifice and determination, about making the enemy pay for every victory, and ensuring that even defeat would serve a purpose. And through it all, none of them mentioned the possibility of surrender. The mobilization of the Zaphirian Grand Fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships from every corner of their empire converged on the home systems, a massive armada of 5,000 vessels carrying 2 million of their finest warriors. High Commander Veltar had staked his career and his species' reputation on this final assault against humanity. Standing in the command center of the massive dreadnought Absolute Victory, Veltar watched as the last of his reinforcements arrived through hyperspace. Cruisers and destroyers, assault ships and planetary bombardment vessels, support craft and elite troop transports. Every ship type in the Zaphirian arsenal was represented in numbers that could conquer entire star systems. "Commander, all fleet elements have reported ready status," his aide announced. "The Grand Fleet awaits your orders." Veltar's forearms gestured at the tactical display showing the route to Earth. "Begin the advance. I want that system completely surrounded. No human ship escapes, no human colony survives. We will make such an example of them that no species will ever dare to resist the Empire again." The journey to Earth took 2 weeks, and during that time the story of humanity's resistance continued to spread throughout Zaphirian space. On conquered worlds across the galaxy, subjugated peoples gathered in secret to whisper about the small planet that had destroyed the mighty First Legion. In the underground tunnels of Koreth Prime, miners who had labored for decades under Zaphirian rule passed along detailed accounts of the battles at Titan and Europa. The stories had grown in the telling, but the core facts remained unchanged. Humans had faced impossible odds and made their enemies pay dearly for every victory. A old Koreth female named Kresh, who had lived through the original conquest of her world, spoke to a gathering of young workers in the depths of the primary mining complex. "I have seen what happens when the Zaphirians come to a world," she said, her scales dim with age but her voice strong. "Every species tries to fight at first. Some use superior technology, others rely on defensive fortifications. Still others attempt to hide until the storm passes. All of them fail because they fight the way the Zaphirians expect them to fight." One of the younger workers, barely more than a juvenile, raised his claw hesitantly. "Elder Kresh, what makes the humans different?" The old female's eyes gleamed with something that might have been hope. "The humans do not fight to win, young one. They fight to make sure their enemies remember the price of victory. That is something entirely different." On Altair Prime, similar gatherings took place in the forced labor camps where Altarian refugees processed raw materials for the Empire. The tall, graceful beings had once been poets and philosophers, their civilization built around art and contemplation. The Zaphirian conquest had reduced them to manual laborers, but it had not broken their spirits entirely. An Altarian named Velshan, who had once been a university professor before the conquest, shared what he had learned about human military doctrine from intercepted communications. "They call it asymmetric warfare," he explained to his fellow prisoners. "Instead of trying to match the enemy's strengths, they focus on exploiting the enemy's weaknesses. But more than that, they seem to understand something that we never grasped. Sometimes losing a battle can be more valuable than winning it." Meanwhile, on Earth, the final preparations for humanity's last stand were nearing completion. The planet's population had been evacuated to the southern hemisphere, leaving the northern continents as a massive killing field filled with hidden weapons, booby traps, and desperate defenders. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Parker, one of the few survivors from Titan, stood before a group of new recruits in a training facility deep in the Australian outback. These young men and women would form the core of Earth's ground defense forces, assuming the Zaphirian fleet made it past the orbital defenses. "Listen carefully," Parker said, his voice carrying the weight of hard experience. "The aliens think war is about superior technology and overwhelming numbers. They're wrong. War is about will, and no species in this galaxy has more will than humanity." He activated a holographic display showing footage from the battles at Titan and Europa. "Watch how our people fought. See how they turned every defeat into an opportunity to hurt the enemy. That's what we're going to do here on Earth, except we're going to do it better." The recruits watched in silence as the recordings played. They saw Sergeant Lopez holding her position against impossible odds. They saw Captain Grant ramming her ship into the enemy flagship. They saw pilot after pilot choosing death over surrender, each sacrifice taking dozens of alien lives. The Zaphirians are coming with their entire fleet, Parker continued. 5,000 ships carrying 2 million warriors. They think those numbers guarantee victory. They're about to learn that numbers don't mean anything when your enemy refuses to quit. In orbit around Earth, the construction crews were putting the finishing touches on humanity's final surprise, Project Prometheus. Phase 2 had produced weapons that looked impossible even to their human creators, gravity manipulators that could crush starships like tin cans, biological warfare agents designed specifically for Zaphirian physiology, kinetic kill vehicles that could accelerate to significant fractions of light speed. Dr. Chen stood in the command center of the orbital defense platform Retribution, watching as the last of the exotic weapons came online. The platform itself was a marvel of human engineering and desperation. Built in secret over the past 6 months using materials salvaged from destroyed alien ships. "Are we really going to be able to pull this off?" asked his assistant, Dr. Lisa Grant, the younger sister of the pilot who had died at Europa. Chen looked at the tactical displays showing Earth's pathetically small defensive fleet. 30 ships, all that remained of humanity's once proud space navy. Against 5,000 alien vessels, they wouldn't last an hour in conventional combat. "Pull it off?" Chen repeated quietly. "Lisa, we're not trying to pull anything off. We're trying to make sure that when the historians write about this war, they'll say that humanity went down fighting, that we made the bastards pay for every inch." The Zaphirian Grand Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system like an avalanche of metal and death. Their ships spread out in perfect formation, a wall of firepower that stretched across millions of cubic kilometers of space. At the center of the formation, High Commander Veltar watched the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. "Begin long-range bombardment of the outer planets," he ordered. "I want every human installation destroyed before we reach Earth itself. No survivors, no exceptions." The bombardment of the gas giant mining stations began immediately. Beams of coherent energy lanced across space, vaporizing human facilities that had taken years to build. But as the alien weapons fired, they revealed their positions to sensors hidden throughout the solar system. On the command deck of the UES Retribution, Captain Danny Morrison received targeting data from a network of stealthed reconnaissance drones. Morrison was the older brother of the pilot who had died at Europa, and he had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. "All ships, this is actual," Morrison broadcast to the human fleet. "We have firing solutions on the lead elements of the enemy formation. Remember, we're not trying to win this battle. We're trying to make sure they remember it." The first phase of the battle for Earth began with 30 human ships charging directly into the heart of a formation containing 5,000 alien vessels. It should have been over in minutes, but the humans had learned from every previous engagement with the Zaphirians. Instead of trying to fight ship-to-ship battles, the human vessels used their superior knowledge of the solar system to set traps among the asteroids and debris fields. Instead of engaging at long range where alien weapons held every advantage, they closed to point-blank range where their kinetic weapons could penetrate enemy shields. Most importantly, they coordinated their attacks with the orbital defense platforms that the Zaphirians hadn't even known existed. As alien ships moved to engage the human fleet, they found themselves caught in crossfires from concealed weapons emplacements that had been built into asteroids and space debris. The battle raged for 6 hours before the last human ship was destroyed. But by then, the Zaphirian formation was in chaos. Hundreds of alien vessels had been eliminated or damaged, and their perfect tactical coordination had been shattered by tactics they had never encountered before. High Commander Veltar stared at his tactical displays in shock and growing anger. His mighty fleet had been bloodied by 30 primitive ships using weapons that should have been obsolete centuries ago. Worse, the humans had died fighting to the last ship, the last crew, the last shot. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy buildups from the third planet," his sensor officer reported. "The humans appear to be activating some kind of planetary defense network." Veltar's mandibles clicked ominously. "Then we finish this quickly. Begin planetary bombardment immediately. I want that world reduced to molten slag." The battle for Earth lasted 72 hours and became the kind of legend that species would tell their children for 1,000 generations. What the Zaphirians expected to be a simple planetary bombardment turned into a nightmare that would haunt the galaxy's greatest military power for the rest of its existence. As the alien fleet moved into bombardment range, Earth's hidden defenses came alive. Weapons that humanity had built in secret over the past year emerged from concealment throughout the solar system. Gravity manipulators hidden in the asteroid belt began generating massive gravitational anomalies that twisted Zaphirian ships into unrecognizable metal sculptures. Kinetic kill vehicles launched from the outer planets accelerated to tremendous speeds before slamming into alien hulls with the force of nuclear weapons. High Commander Veltar watched his tactical displays in growing horror as his fleet began to disintegrate around him. These were not the primitive weapons his intelligence had predicted. The humans had somehow developed technology that rivaled or even exceeded Zaphirian capabilities, and they were using it with devastating effectiveness, sir. We've lost over 200 ships to the gravity weapons alone, his tactical officer reported. The kinetic projectiles are punching through our shields as if they don't exist, and we're detecting some kind of biological agent being dispersed through the debris clouds. The biological weapons were Dr. Chen's masterpiece, designed specifically to target Zaphirian physiology. The airborne agent caused rapid cellular breakdown in alien tissue while being completely harmless to human biology. As Zaphirian boarding parties tried to secure human installations, they found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't see or defend against. But the real shock came when the aliens tried to land ground forces on Earth itself. The northern continents had been turned into the largest killing field in galactic history. Every building, every road, every piece of infrastructure had been rigged with explosives or converted into a weapons platform. Colonel Sarah Adams commanded the defense of the Himalayan stronghold, humanity's last official military base. Her garrison consisted of 300 volunteers, all of them survivors from previous battles who had asked specifically to be part of Earth's final stand. They knew they were going to die, but they intended to make that death count for something. The Zaphirian ground assault began with orbital bombardment that lasted for 6 hours. Energy beams from space turned entire mountain ranges into molten glass, but the human defenders had dug deep. Their bunkers and tunnels had been carved from solid rock and reinforced with alien materials, salvaged from previous battles. When the bombardment ended, 20,000 Zaphirian warriors descended from their ships in perfect formation. They advanced across the scarred landscape with mechanical precision, their weapons ready and their armor gleaming. They expected to find broken humans cowering in whatever shelters remained. Instead, they found Colonel Adams and her defenders waiting for them. The battle that followed violated every principle of military science. The humans were outnumbered 60-1, armed with inferior weapons and fighting from positions that should have been indefensible after the orbital bombardment. By every reasonable standard, they should have been eliminated within minutes. They held for 18 hours. Adams had learned from every human victory in the war so far. Her soldiers used the rugged terrain to their advantage, turning every valley into an ambush site and every ridge into a sniper's nest. When the aliens brought up heavy weapons, the humans used underground tunnels to attack from unexpected directions. When Zaphirian air support tried to provide cover, human surface-to-air missiles knocked them out of the sky. Most importantly, the human defenders fought with the kind of desperate fury that the Zaphirians had never learned to counter. When their rifles ran out of ammunition, they used grenades. When their grenades were exhausted, they used improvised explosives made from mining equipment. When their explosives were gone, they fought with knives and bayonets in their bare hands. Sergeant Danny Morrison, younger brother of the pilot who had died at Europa, held the eastern approach with just 20 Marines against 300 alien warriors. His position should have fallen within minutes, but Morrison had prepared for this moment since his brother's death. Every piece of cover had been rigged with explosives. Every apparent retreat was actually an advance toward a better ambush position. For 4 hours, Morrison's tiny force held off an enemy that outnumbered them 15-1. They used every dirty trick that human soldiers had developed over centuries of warfare: booby traps and false surrenders, sniper fire from impossible positions, and suicide attacks that eliminated entire alien squads. When Morrison finally died, he was strangling a Zaphirian champion twice his size with his bare hands, buying his last surviving Marine enough time to activate the sector's final explosive charge. The blast that followed eliminated over 200 alien warriors and their command vehicle. Colonel Adams herself made the final stand in the command bunker deep beneath the mountain. As Zaphirian assault troops broke through the last defenses, she armed the base's nuclear self-destruct system and waited for them to get close enough. Her final transmission was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that it would be heard throughout human space and beyond. "This is Colonel Sarah Adams. United Earth Defense Force, we came here to hold this position and we held it. We came here to make you bleed and we made you bleed. We came here to show the galaxy that humanity doesn't surrender, and I think we made our point. Tell your Emperor that we'll see him in hell." The nuclear detonation that followed eliminated the remaining Zaphirian ground forces and carved a new crater in the side of the mountain. But the explosion also served as a signal to activate the final phase of Project Prometheus. Throughout Earth's cities, hidden transmitters began broadcasting on frequencies that would reach every corner of the galaxy. The message was simple but devastating. Detailed information about Zaphirian military capabilities, tactical doctrine, and most importantly, their weaknesses. High Commander Veltar received the transmission while trying to coordinate the retreat of his shattered fleet. Of his original force of 5,000 ships, fewer than 800 remained combat effective. The rest had been destroyed or damaged so badly that they would never fight again. But the real shock came when he understood what the humans had been doing throughout the entire war. They hadn't just been fighting to defend their world. They had been learning. Every battle, every engagement, every skirmish had been a test, a way to gather intelligence about Zaphirian technology and tactics. The data they had collected was now being transmitted to every species in the galaxy, along with detailed instructions on how to build weapons specifically designed to kill Zaphirians. The broadcast included blueprints for kinetic weapons, formulas for biological agents, and most damaging of all, psychological profiles that explained exactly how to break Zaphirian morale. Admiral Hayes, broadcasting from humanity's secret deep space facility beyond Pluto, delivered the message that would echo through galactic history. "You came to our home and killed our people. You thought you were fighting a backward species who would roll over and die when faced with superior technology. You were wrong. We've been studying you since the day we met, learning your weaknesses and preparing for this moment. Every human who died in this war died gathering intelligence that we're now sharing with everyone you've ever conquered. This war doesn't end with Earth's destruction. It begins with it." The truth hit Veltar like a physical blow. The humans had never expected to win this war through military victory. They had been playing a completely different game, one focused on long-term strategic goals rather than short-term tactical success. Every sacrifice, every desperate last stand, every seemingly pointless act of defiance had been part of a larger plan to bring down the Zaphirian Empire. Throughout Zaphirian space, the effects were immediate and devastating. On Korath Prime, miners armed with human-designed weapons emerged from the underground tunnels and began attacking their overseers. On Altair Prime, philosophers turned into guerrilla fighters using tactics copied directly from the human playbook. On a dozen other worlds, slave populations rose in coordinated rebellions that the Empire was no longer strong enough to suppress. The Zaphirian fleet limped back to their home systems to find their empire collapsing from within. Species that had been subjugated for centuries were suddenly armed with weapons that could kill their masters and tactics that made victory inevitable. The great military machine that had conquered 47 worlds found itself fighting for survival on every front. High Commander Veltar's final report to what remained of the Galactic Council was brief and devastating. "We sent our strongest against humans. Not one returned unchanged. They didn't defeat us with superior technology or greater numbers. They defeated us by refusing to be defeated. They turned every loss into a victory and every death into a weapon. The Empire is finished." Within a year, the Zaphirian Empire had collapsed completely. The species that had ruled their sector of the galaxy for 3 millennia found themselves refugees on their own homeworld, surrounded by enemies they had created through centuries of oppression.